Hey guys, so today I am doing a review of The Phantom of the Opera by this author whose name I'm not even going to try to pronounce because I'm going to embarrass myself. So yeah, this is the original Phantom of the Opera book that's been made into a bunch of movies and everything, and this was published in 1910, and this was my first time reading it. So yeah, I'm not going to get into the plot too much because I feel like the story is pretty well known at this point, but I'll talk about it a little bit. It's basically about this guy, this Phantom Opera, who's living underneath of the opera house. He's not really a ghost. He's called the Opera Ghost in the story, but he's just this human who's deformed. This isn't really much of a spoiler. It's kind of revealed somewhat early in the story, but he's like facially deformed, and he's living beneath the opera house. He's got his like own house that he built, and there's this series of tunnels and hidden passages and whatnot. I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. And he falls in love with this opera singer girl, and she actually is like swooned by his charms right away, and she doesn't know that he's really the way he is, deformed and everything. And she's also kind of in love with this other guy, this childhood friend that she grew up with. So the story is kind of about like this love triangle between her and these other two guys, one being the opera ghost and her childhood friend. So yeah, the story is more like romance and drama than it is horror. It does have some elements of suspense and horror to it. I wouldn't really pin this book in one genre though. It's definitely kind of a mixed genre book. But anyway, I was excited going into this. Never read it before, but I had a hard time getting into it, to be honest. It's very slow in the beginning, and it just took me a while to get interested in it. One thing I did forget to mention, or I almost forgot to mention, is this is actually based on a true story, or loosely based on a true story. I did not know that. So at the start of the book, there's an introduction, or it's a prologue, but it reads more like an introduction than it does a prologue. It's the author explaining how he come to discover this story, and the entire book is written as if it were like a true account. Like it reads like a nonfiction book through discovery of like letters and stuff like that. And there's actually like footnotes at some points in the book further explaining certain aspects of the story and whatnot. So it reads like a nonfiction book, even though it is fiction, but loosely based on a true story. Again, I'm not 100% sure how much of it's true and how much of it is fiction. I did a little bit of research on it. I read a couple different articles. There seems to be a little bit of conflicting information surrounding this story, but I seem to have come to the conclusion that it's just kind of loosely based on a true story. The only things that I know for sure are true is there actually was a real person that was deformed facially and everything that the author based the opera ghost character off of. And then the other part of the story that is true is the location and setting. This takes place in a real opera house in which there was an actual like underground tunnel and everything, and a whole underground lake and house beneath the opera house, like this huge underground portion beneath the opera house. And it takes place a lot in this book. There's a huge section of that towards the end I'll talk about later, as I said. And all of that is real in real life. Like it's an actual place and everything. And again, that's just what I read about it. If you know more about it than me, feel free to comment down below. Let me know what's true about this book and what's fiction. But anyway, enough about that. So it did take me a while to get into this book. It's a little bit confusing right away. There's some different characters that are introduced. I'm not really entirely sure what was going on in the beginning. It was a little bit confusing. But towards like the halfway point, or a little bit past the halfway point, that's when things start to get interesting. So most of the book is kind of this love triangle, as I mentioned. There's a lot of drama going on. This childhood friend of Christine, who was the opera singer type girl, he's trying to like propose to her, and he keeps confessing his love for her. And she's telling him that, oh, like I love you too, but I can't do this. Like there's someone else. And she's like kind of under the spell of this opera ghost guy. So they're basically like fighting for her affection, kind of. And that's kind of a lot of the first half of the book, it's just a lot of drama and stuff between that. When this book really starts to pick up, and when I got really interested in it, was toward like the last third of the book, where the protagonists are going through the underground tunnels, the hidden passages. They're trying to find this opera ghost guy, to where like the story reaches a climax at the opera ghost house underneath the opera house. And yeah, that's when the story really picks up. So I'm trying not to spoil it too much, but that was really where the story had my interest. There's a lot of cool stuff, a lot of really cool descriptions of the underground tunnels and everything, and it's actually kind of creepy. This is where the horror elements come into play a little bit, and it's really not horror that much because there's nothing really supernatural here, but it was kind of creepy. And the opera ghost guy is a really good like villainous type character. He reminds me of a villain from a movie. He has like all of these, not all, there's a few like traps and stuff, and yeah, I don't know. It's kind of hard to explain without spoiling it, but the opera ghost just knows like this whole underground region like the back of his hand, and he has all these different passages, and he has this one room in his house called a torture chamber, and there's one scene towards the end that takes place in the torture chamber that is really cool. That was like my favorite part of the book. Again, I don't want to spoil it, but that whole part of the book is really cool. So there definitely is some action going on in here too. Most of it takes place towards the end, but there is some action going on. Don't think it's just some drama romance throughout the whole book, because it's not, even though that is a large part of the story. But yeah, it took me a while to get into it right away, but it starts to pick up, and it got pretty good towards the end. I was really enjoying it up until, I enjoyed the ending too. The ending was a little bit mixed for me in some areas. There's one character that makes a certain decision at the end that feels a little bit unnatural, and I just wasn't really sure how I felt about it. I liked the ending for the most part, but there was a certain part of the ending that just felt a little bit unbelievable. But yeah. One thing too about this book is the writing is very simple and straightforward. I was expecting a little bit more elegant writing with it being a classic, because it seems like a lot of older books, usually the writing is, top notch. Like there's a lot of elegance, and the words are woven very like, in kind of a fancy manner, and a lot of big words are used and stuff. But the story being told here is very straightforward, focused, and there's not really a lot of depth to the story. It's just the story being told. That's it. Very simple and straightforward. Now, because it is written was written in 1910, there is a lot of like old-fashioned, old English language being used. A lot of old phrases and terms in here that you do not see nowadays in the books. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're not really familiar with reading older classic books, then this book might just seem a little bit weird, and you might have a hard time enjoying it. For me, I've read a lot of classic stories. I've read Frankenstein and a lot of other really old books, so I kind of knew what to expect with the whole difference in the language back then. Yeah, guys, overall, I did enjoy this book. I wouldn't say it's one of my favorites. There's a lot of other classics I would recommend before this one, like Dracula or Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which were both written around a similar time frame as this one, and I think those are both better stories. But I did enjoy this. I thought it was a good book, even though it took me a while to get interested in it. Like I said, the first half of the book was a little slow and confusing, but the last, 30% of the book was really good. There was some really suspenseful moments in it, surprisingly. It really turned away from like the romance and drama earlier on in the story, and there was a lot of action at the end that really kept my interest. I really liked that part of it. Yeah, guys, that's my thoughts on Phantom of the Opera. I wouldn't really recommend this book unless you're into reading classics. If you're into reading classics, I would definitely recommend checking it out. If you're not really into reading classics, that's not your type of thing, then I probably would pass this one up, just because the writing in it is very old-fashioned, and I can see how some people would have a hard time getting past that. So, yeah, guys, that's my review for Phantom of the Opera. Thanks for watching. Peace.